Right now, I'd like to introduce to you producer Mark Mitten.
Thanks, Opal. Thanks, everybody, for coming out so early on a Sunday morning. This is a timely film. And if you voted in the election last week, you saw that one of our subjects that you'll see in just a moment, Cyrus Vance, was reelected. Cyrus Vance, as you may know, is the DA that didn't prosecute Harvey Weinstein, didn't prosecute the Trump kids for the Trump Soho, didn't prosecute a lot of people. What you are going to see is who he did decide to prosecute. And I think you're going to find it to be a little bit of a puzzle.
It's my pleasure to welcome back Mark Mitten, producer Julie Goldman, and the subjects of the film, Jill Sung, Vera Sung, Chanterelle Sung, and Matt Taibbi. Please give him a hand. Hi, everybody. So Mark, I know you brought the story to Steve initially, right? And he was on board, but when you introduced him to the Sungs, you guys were initially reluctant. So half. Okay.
Here, Jill.
Yeah. No, it's a question for you guys. Just to find out how you came around from the divided reluctancy to deciding to have Steve James tell your story.
Since when have the songs been so shy?
I don't know.
Go ahead. Why did you make this film? How did we convince you to make the film?
In the beginning, it was when Mark first mentioned about the idea. It was at the beginning of the trial for us.
Can you see me tapping?
So that was an extremely stressful time period for us. At that time, all we could think about and focus on is how to win this trial and how to do the best. So when Mark said to me, he said, "Do you realize you're the only bank which has been indicted in the wake of the financial crisis?" I mean, it was really astounding. I mean, we sort of understood that, but at that moment we weren't thinking about things like that. But he said that, "I really think a documentary should be made." So he brought in director Steve James to meet with us in New York City. He'd worked with Steve on Life Itself. And that's when we were divided, I guess. But once we met Steve, actually my parents didn't even know who Steve James, what he did and what he directed. Neither did Chanterelle, neither did my sister Heather. But once we met him, he was just such a nice person, real humanitarian. And he told us from the outset, we're going to have to report all aspects. I'm going to document also the district attorney's office too. But that wasn't as much of a concern because we knew what the truth was, and we were just happy that someone would be willing to hear our side.
And so you guys are, of course, the focus of the film, what you go through as a family, but the setting in which it takes place is in a fairly complicated setting. And I was interested to know if you had some hand in helping to clarify and make a little bit easier for the audience to understand what's going on around the banking, or was that more you and Steve, Mark?
Well, I think we wanted to simplify it because it's clearly a complex story. And we wanted to make it more accessible to make sure that people understood just what the situation was between the big banks and the small bank here. So the David versus Goliath story and how community banking plays a significant role that's typically underestimated. There's only half the community banks left that there were in 2008. So we wanted to bring that to life, and at the same time show that these are people that really understood their community versus the big faceless banks. This is one of the reasons that we used the graphics that we did for representing the larger too big to fail banks. So the big faceless buildings with the quotes and the metrics on them, because you really don't know who runs those banks. You don't really know who's in control. Yes, and that was.
Yes. My next question was for you, Matt. You, of course, wrote a book chronicling the larger economic circumstance in which this took place. When you heard about the story, though, I wondered what was most egregious to you, what stood out as most egregious to you about what the Sungs were experiencing.
I believe I heard about this story the first time through your lawyer, who is a friend of mine. And at the time, there were a handful of reporters who cover Wall Street who had just started to get onto this story about the fact that none of the big banks had faced indictments, even though there was ample grounds for criminal cases all over the place, and then that included people like Gretchen Morgensen from the New York Times, myself. We had started to write these stories, and but it was too hard for a lot of audiences to really understand because it was too abstract, and in order to put a human face on what was going on, I think when I heard about the Sung story, I thought it was from a journalist perspective, it would be helpful because it would show people, look, here's a family-owned bank that tried to do everything by the book, and the whole world comes down upon them, and then right next door are all these other malefactors, and nothing happens to them. I thought that was a story that would be easy for people to understand, and I think it was.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to ask you, Jill and Vera and Chanterelle, like, the first time that I watched the film, I remember feeling incensed at the point where you're saying, we brought this facts to you, we pointed out to you that we found this, that we took steps to correct it. I just wondered your feelings in being faced with punishment after trying to do the right thing.
I think each one of us had a very personal moment when you started to realize things were not going the way you think things should go, and externally forces are coming upon you. For me, it was almost, it was definitely overwhelming and incredible, because we really understood this is what we needed to do, and we took immediate steps and cooperated with everyone along the way, whether they were internal, external, law enforcement, even the counterparty Fannie Mae. So it was unbelievable and incredible. But once it starts happening to you, I almost go into a robot mode. It's that, you have to fight for your survival. And so whatever you need to do, you're going to, make sure that you're going to do to protect what your father has created, what your community has done, and what we have done as a family and as a company. So for me, it was really, after the initial shock and disbelief, I was like, we have to just now focus on fighting.
I think the other thing is that if this is a small little bank that did the right thing and actually did more than the right thing, how could you expect any small bank to ever come forward, or big bank for that matter,
right,
if this is what happens when you do the right thing?
Right.
Yeah, I always go back to this phrase, no good deed goes unpunished. And actually, ironically, it was a phrase that my former bureau chief from the district attorney's office had actually written on one of the case memos when he handed me this, a complex case to investigate. But, these words really ring true, and this is exactly how we all felt during this experience. We've done a lot of these Q&As already, but every time we're sort of asked this question, it's hard for us to explain the emotions, the anger. I think that Jill explained how we went into survival mode. I think every one of my family members did, and for me, having worked at that office and having been trained on how to investigate cases the right way and prosecute the right way and ethically, the thing that helped me sort of get through this was knowing that my job duties as a prosecutor, and even as someone helping to defend my family against that same office, was always to follow the truth. And so in that way, I never was on a different side. I was on the side of truth as a prosecutor, and I was on the side of truth when it came time to help my family to defend this. But it's really hard because, with this case, for me, actually going back to one of your earlier questions, I was hoping that the documentary would show the entire legal case, but you can't do that in 90 minutes. But I just want people to know that there is no prosecutorial merit to this case. And really, the way it got so far down this path was because it was conducted in such a one-sided manner where instead of following the facts, unfortunately a conclusion was drawn from the outset. And it was all about trying to reach that conclusion instead of, following the evidence.
When you're falsely accused of something, it's just, I can't, the feeling, and it's so public, and it affects so many people around you in the community. It's just, it makes you physically ill, actually. And one of the things that when it happens, and it's very surreal, but you have to grasp and you have to realize this is happening. You have to do all your best to defend yourself. One of the things that I remembered going through the trial was that, we're not the only one. There's so many people out there who are falsely accused. And so this becomes a fight for all of them. I mean, there's a astounding statistic that 95% of all white-collar crimes end up in being disposed of through guilty pleas. So that's a lot of people that are innocent people who are pleading guilty because they cannot afford a trial. So that's one thing that is really astounding.
And we know that the person whose discretion started the ball rolling was just reelected last week. Speak to that in the wake of Matt. Yeah.
I think the thing that was especially egregious about Cy Vance's conduct in all this is that most of America didn't understand what happened in 2008, what the financial crisis was all about. But there were people who did know, people who worked in the banking industry, and people who were people like Cy Vance, who were in the criminal justice system. And the people who did know knew that what had happened was exactly the opposite of what had happened in the ABACUS case. The financial crisis was about big banks getting as many people as they could to sign up for loans that the banks themselves knew that the people couldn't pay off. This was the opposite situation. The problem wasn't that the people who were getting the loans weren't able to pay. It had nothing to do with that. So this, for him to represent this case as being symbolic of the financial crisis was unbelievably dishonest. I mean, it was so clearly an act of opportunism politically, and I can't believe that he was reelected. But that says a lot about this country. I don't know.
So yes, yes, it's no words can describe our disappointment and our fury and actually really deep concern about where we are in the political situation, where someone who has clearly has done things that are contrary to what he's supposed to do is so easily reelected without any real challenge to him and his issues that he's kind of run over. So I am, especially here in New York City, where we are a highly pluralistic, cosmopolitan city, and it's just unbelievable to me. I don't know the forces that go behind this. It's something that I have personally tried not to be part of, and that's, maybe that's what we need to do as people like us in this room become more involved in those forces, because to me it's I can't see, I don't know what's going on, and people could have crossed him out and wrote down a different name, and I forgot what the number was, like 15,000 votes they crossed out his, well 90%, over 100,000 he got votes, but like 15,000 actually did cross out his name or wrote somebody else's name, but we don't know the whole story yet because they have to count them. But for me, it's really, really disappointing and very concerning that we're at the situation we are today.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the audience for, yes, gentleman in the back.
Why didn't ABACUS offer to buy back the 30 mortgage loans from Fannie Mae? Or did you try? Would that have made a difference?
We actually bought them back. Yeah, and actually we didn't just buy those back. We had offered to Fannie Mae to buy back every single loan we sold to them. And Fannie Mae, ironically, told us no. And the reason why, and this is kind of gets a little complicated, I'm going to try to make this really simple because I actually was a little bit shocked too. I didn't realize these loans are sold into a mortgage-backed security. The investor of the mortgage-backed security wants basically a loan, a security that's paying on time at the rate of that security. If we buy back that loan goes off it and that security gets paid off faster. So the investor who pays a premium for that actually loses money. So Fannie Mae told us outright that unless they find something specifically wrong with the loans that we sold to them, they don't have the right to pull the loan from the pool. And so they actually, that's why, unlike what the DA's office basically said, not only these loans that we are putting forth in this case, but every single loan that you ever sold to Fannie Mae is bad. Fannie Mae was did the complete opposite actions. They said we couldn't do that. They couldn't do it. Yes.
I apologize, I forget your name, but for the sister who was working in the DA's office, have you returned to the law? And if not, how do you perceive the legal profession at this stage?
So I left the DA's office about a year and a half into the investigation, and then because that was always my passion to work in public service, I decided to work for the New York City Department of Investigation. I wanted to actually get some more experience doing long-term investigations, so I worked there for 2.5 years, and in the midst of that was when the indictment came down against ABACUS. And then after working at the New York City Department of Investigation, I went to work for the Storm Recovery Office for New York State after Hurricane Sandy. State got $5 billion to help rebuild New York, and so I did that for a little bit. I'm now in the private sector. I'm not practicing law, and I'm working in corporate security for a pharmaceutical company. The way I look at it, my heart is always trying to, towards sort of public good, and it's a matter of where you feel you can be most effective in doing that. So I don't ever close out the thought that, one day I might return to public service or government or practicing law, but for now, I think where I am has enabled me to take a step back from everything that happened, and just sort of having the idealism when I first started, and then all of these things happening, which made me very cynical. I needed to take a step back now, but as I have said, with this documentary, it's been such a gift to our family, to us, because it's given us this voice back, as well as a bit of our idealism back, because the support from just strangers and people in the community who have seen it, who have come forward to support, is very inspirational, and I think it makes us feel like, is there something that we can do now to take something bad and try to effectuate more positive change?
Yes, right here.
The really telling point in the film when the dad says, regardless of the outcome, people are going to look down on the Chinese community because of all these lies. Does he still feel that way, and how do you guys feel about that?
He feels, and you would agree with me, right? He still feels. He's that you are my sisters. We share the same dad. He definitely feels harm was done. Harm has been done. How to redeem from that is very difficult. He's also very angry. And he really feels that this district attorney should not be a district attorney.
So it comes up often, this issue of racism and the targeting of a specific ethnic community. And it clearly, in our mind, this was an act of racism, among other things. And the problem with that is that you create a perception or a stereotype. You enforce certain perceptions and stereotype of the particular community that you're targeting through these actions. And this is no different in that case. And it takes so much work to overcome that. And it takes years, and it takes effort, not by one person, by multiple organizations and groups and people fighting that. So this is really, like, once again, this is another real huge problem when this happens, because now we are taking huge steps backwards. That so much effort has to be redone to get back to where we were in the beginning, which is still behind. And I do believe my father has been a fighter and an advocate for civil rights for a very long time. He, as you saw in the film, he was an immigration attorney. And it is very sad to see in his cycle of his lifetime where he's taken huge leap forwards in the efforts he's made and raised his family here and everything, to have to, I wouldn't say it's the end of his career, but the twilight of his career, to see these steps backwards again. So that's the unfortunate thing.
Time for one last question. Yes.
How did the situation affect the bank's relationship in the community?
So I'll start with just one example and then let my sisters expound. But this was something very interesting during the trial. So the prosecutors called a number of witnesses to the stand in support of their case, and among those witnesses were borrowers, customers of the bank. And remember distinctly at one point, one of the borrowers, on direct examination by the prosecutor, was trying to follow the prosecutor's lead to suggest that the loan officer from the bank was the one who made her falsify her loan application. But our lawyers had found that not only was the borrower also culpable in that she was the one who was trying to get the loan, therefore she was actually falsifying the information. She had used the same fake employer's name on another loan with a different bank, and we were able to introduce that into evidence. So that thing happens at trial, and then apparently 3 weeks later, someone in the bank told my sisters my sisters saw her in the elevators at the bank at ABACUS applying for another loan.
Shameless.
Yes, exactly.
But I think and I'll let my sisters again expound on this, but it just that was interesting to us, because we think that despite all this, the customers still believed in the bank and trusted the bank and felt that they could get a good product from the bank. And so, even though being a witness against us at trial, we're willing to come back.
Yeah, I mean, so the positive side, I mean, this is kind of a weird story, because at the same time, like you said, she's a bit shameless, right? But, and by the way, we couldn't do the loan for her because, obviously, I just want to get that one in. So the positive thing is that I think overall the community does see this as our fight as a badge of honor, because we were successful and we did fight for them and for our community. So I think that's a positive thing. They felt that that by us taking this stand, that their voices were heard, and this film was a huge part of it. I mean, this film, if the film wasn't made, I don't know how much people would have felt so, vindicated and honored in that way. That's the positive side. I think that, so our relationship with our community right now is strong, and we are most important, those actions. So we are lending to our community in the way that we find best, so we can, in a safe and sound manner. We're working directly with all our parties, the regulator and everything, to ensure that they get the credit they need, and that's the most important, that we are able to serve.
And if you want to read more about the case, you can read Matt Taibbi's book, The Divide, because he features it in chapter 1 of The Divide.
Hey, Chanterelle, when you're ready to run against Vince, we're ready to support you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's a great note to end it on. Thank you also for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Opal. Thank you, Doc NYC.
Thank you.